Thank you for joining us, everyone. Good evening. My name is Eileen Regan, and I'm the CCO at Examen, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar series where we will be discussing male fertility. So the webinars take place on a monthly basis, and we're joined each month by an expert in their field of fertility treatment or therapies, and it's open to all. So we have a wide range of participants joining us today, from professionals in healthcare, acupuncturists, nutritionists, as well, of course, as the men, couples, women and individuals who are on their own fertility journey as well. So you're all most welcome to join us, and we really hope that you enjoy the event. So I'd like to first introduce you to our speakers. So our chair, Professor Sheena Lewis, is the founder and CEO of Examen and honorary professor of Queen's University Belfast, where for the past 25 years has dedicated her work and her research on male infertility, specifically in sperm DNA fragmentation. Professor Lewis is past chair of the British Andrology Society, UK National Representative and past chair of the Andrology Special Interest Group of the ESHRA, and past executive member of the British Fertility Society and a founder member and past vice chair of the Irish Fertility Society. She is currently an executive member of the Association of Reproductive and Clinical Scientists and chair of their Scientific Advisory Committee. And she's published over 100 full papers as well as numerous book chapters and reviews. Professor Lewis's research led to the formation of a spin-out company, Examen, from Queen's University in Belfast, where we market the exact range of male fertility tests powered by the sperm comet technology, which is the market leader in sperm DNA fragmentation testing in the UK and Ireland. Also then joining us today is Melanie Brown, our speaker and special guest. And Melanie is a nutritionist specialising in fertility with a special interest in male infertility. She has a master's in nutritional medicine, and her final research project examined the role of male obesity and IVF outcomes. Mel was the senior nutritionist at the prestigious Zeta West Fertility and Pregnancy Clinic for 10 years. And in 2011, she founded her own Melanie Brown Nutrition, which specialises in preconception, IVF and pregnancy nutrition. So our thanks to Melanie for joining us tonight. So before I hand over to the speakers, I just want to run through some housekeeping. So we'll have an intro from Professor Lewis, and then we'll hand over to Melanie. And at the end, we'll allow 15-20 minutes at the end for Q&A. So please you'll see two options on your window for chat and for Q&A. If you could use the dedicated Q&A session, and feel free to add questions throughout, not the chat function. And what we'll do is you'll have the opportunity to rate questions, and then Professor Lewis will then share the questions during the session at the end. So we'll take all the questions at the end of the session. If you experience any technical issues, please use the chat, and we'll do our very best to help you. Attendees will be muted throughout, and videos will be enabled for our speakers only, just to make you aware. And all of the events in the series will be recorded and made available on our events page following each session. So allow up to 24 hours. If you're only able to join us for a bit, they should be online tomorrow. For the professionals as well, 1 CPD point will be awarded for the 1 hour event, and a certificate again will be circulated within the next 24 to 48 hours. At the end of the session, you'll be invited to rate the event. Please do so. We welcome any feedback and any suggestions as well for future sessions. So without further ado, let me hand over now to our chair, Professor Sheena Lewis, to start the session. Thank you.
Hi everybody, and thank you so much for taking time to join us this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us, even though we can't see you, but you can see us. So this evening we're going to be talking about diet, lifestyle and male fertility. And of course you all know that these are all extremely important to make men become dads. So I wanted to talk to you just for a moment or two before we hand over to Mel to tell you about our company and who we are and how we came about and what we're really hoping to do. And then we'll talk specifically from the expert Mel, who has been working on this area for a long time. And if there's anyone who knows about nutrition, it's Melanie Brown. So our mission in Examen is to raise the awareness of male fertility. Now, as you know, females or women are all center stage in fertility clinics. It's female focused, and that's because fertility clinics are run by gynecologists. And of course, they've spent their training looking after women in particular. But men are clearly very important too. And the last HFEA statistics showed that 50% of the issues are male. So we need to look after men, we need to care for them, and we need to investigate their issues, just as we do for the women. So one of the things in our company is to provide men with knowledge and also to provide them with advanced testing. Now, before I founded this company, I was a professor in Queen's University in Belfast, which is one of the major universities in the UK. It's part of the Russell Group. And within the university, we did a lot of non-commercial testing to see if we could find a better test than the semen analysis. One that would really be able to guide you towards a better fertility outcome. The semen analysis is, of course, the first step. It's the first test that a man ought to have. It's the gold standard by the WHO. But there's no doubt that we need extra tests, because the semen analysis will tell you about the number of sperm you have. It will tell you whether or not they're swimming, and it will tell you how normal their structure is. But alas, it will not be able to predict how well a person is going to do with their fertility treatment. And as you all know, I'm sure there are many people who are given a diagnosis of unexplained or idiopathic infertility, and that's not really very helpful, because that means that neither the scientists nor the doctors know quite what's wrong. In contrast, the sperm DNA fragmentation testing will be able to diagnose 40% of the men who have been given a diagnosis of idiopathic infertility, and show them that one of the problems that they have is their DNA is of poor quality. And of course, once you get a diagnosis, then it puts men back in control, and they're able to see if there's something that they can do to improve their DNA quality, so that they can father a child naturally, or at least if they have to go to fertility treatment, they will put their sperm in the best quality that they possibly can before their treatment. The company was set up in 2010, just about the same time as Mel went private with her own company. And I'll not go through all these boring details, but this is just how our company has grown over the last decade. We've achieved various CE marks and ISO, which are international standards of excellence within the company. We've expanded the company, we've rebranded the company, and at the end of last year, even though we had COVID, we doubled the size of our laboratories. So things are going well, and we are delighted to be able to help more and more couples who have fertility problems. As I said earlier, our tests are based on years of research, academic research, where there was no bias, there was no commercial interest in what we were doing. And we have been able to produce some of the largest studies that there are to show the relationships between sperm DNA and a diagnosis of male fertility, sperm DNA and how it impacts on IVF, sperm DNA and how it impacts on ICSI, and also sperm DNA and the close relationship that it has with miscarriage. One of the big benefits of doing our tests is that it puts men excuse me, back into control, because I think men have been left on the sidelines for too long, and it's really important that we have a test that can tell them a lot about the sperm quality, because of course the only thing that matters once the sperm fertilizes the egg is the DNA and its quality, and it's the DNA that makes a man's children look and act like him. We're delighted to say that DNA testing has now been incorporated into 2 international guidelines. The first one is the European Association of Urology, and it says that more complex testing than semen analysis may be required, and that DNA damage may be one of the problems that men have. And then secondly, I was fortunate enough to be a co-author of the ESHRE, which is the European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology, and we wrote guidelines to talk about recurrent pregnancy loss and how it would be best practice to talk to the man about how he might have an impact on pregnancy loss as well. And I've just been invited to update those international guidelines. So what does exact testing do? It allows men to take back control. It allows them to become equal players in their fertility journey. It gives them a chance to improve their sperm quality, and it allows them to become engaged in their treatment. Tonight, we are delighted to have Melanie Brown with us. And as I said earlier, she knows quite a lot about nutrition and lifestyle. Before we ask her to talk to us, I'm just going to tell you a couple of things about our input into looking at antioxidants. I became interested in antioxidants in 1995, and we looked at the seminal plasma. Now, I don't know if those of you who aren't scientists know what seminal plasma is, but in semen, only about 5% of semen is actually sperm, and 95% of it is made up of this amazing plasma or vehicle, which is really just there to transport the sperm from the man to the woman. But when we looked at actually what was in that seminal plasma, we found that the antioxidants or the vitamins that were in the seminal plasma were much higher concentrations in fertile men than they were in men who were having problems in conceiving. And then we found that ascorbate was really, really important. Now, ascorbate is vitamin C. We found it was really important because there was actually 10 times as much vitamin C in seminal plasma than there was in blood. The next thing that we found was that when men had fertility problems, they had much lower levels of vitamin C. So that really made us interested in how important it is to have the right nutrition and to have the right antioxidants in your semen. And this is another paper which wasn't published by us, which shows that these micronutrients like vitamins and antioxidants are associated with improved sperm quality. And of course, that's something that we're really, really interested in, because we think that sperm quality, and particularly the DNA, is the most important part of a sperm. Now, there's lots and lots of controversy about over-the-counter supplements. There's lots of controversy about whether antioxidants are good for you or bad for you. And this is why we've got the expert to talk to you tonight and tell you the true story. Too many vitamins are bad for you. There's no doubt about that. And you can actually, instead of your seesaw being balanced, you can have it tumbling down to one side or tumbling down to the other side. And if you take too many antioxidants, they can actually be bad for your health. So it's really important that you seek advice from an expert, a nutritionist like Mel, who will be able to tell you what to take and what concentrations to take. We know that there are lots of things we can't do to help our fertility. We live in a very polluted society. We can do nothing about the air quality if we live in London. We can do nothing about the fact that if we live in Northern Ireland, there's only about half as much zinc in vegetables that are grown in Northern Ireland as if you live in the other parts of the UK. But there are lots of things that we can do to improve our sperm quality. And these are some of the lifestyle choices which you may decide not to choose. Don't put your phone in your pocket. Don't get STIs. Don't take too many protein shakes at the gym. Don't get too fat. Don't wait until you're about 70 to have your kids, and so on, and so on, and so on. But I'm not going to steal Melanie's thunder. I'm going to hand over to her now, and she can take you on the journey to see how your diet and lifestyle can improve your chances of becoming a dad. Thanks for listening to me.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheena. It was very interesting always to hear about the history of Examen, which I'm a big fan of sperm DNA testing. And thank you for inviting me on to talk about one of my passions, which is obviously nutrition and male fertility, partly because I feel that it's been historically a bit of a neglected area. And certainly in my own experience back in the 80s, when I was trying to have children and we were struggling and we were about to start IVF, and believe it or not, you know, I'd had all my drugs to start. My husband had never even had a semen test. Nobody had ever suggested that he had a sperm test. I didn't think it was abnormal. We all, you know, I just thought, well, it's probably me, you know, as one does. And anyway, we didn't end up needing IVF, but it sort of planted the interest in my mind that it was very much a female problem. And really, I'm so happy that the last couple of years have really, that the male side has really gained a lot of interest with IVF clinics and doctors really taking an interest in DNA fragmentation and things that you can actually do to help your fertility. It's not really rocket science, actually. It's fairly straightforward. There are quite a lot of do's and don'ts. And when I see my own patients, I sort of go through it a bit like that, the do's and don'ts. And that's really what I'm going to talk about this evening. I think it's important. You were talking about taking back a bit of control, and I absolutely really think that is one of the most important things to do, because actually a lot of men will say to doctors, their GPs or something, oh, you know, they've had a bit of a bad news with a sperm test, and they'll immediately say, well, is there something I can do? There must be something I can do. And unfortunately, there's a fairly negative response to that question. No, there's nothing really you can do. You can't really improve your sperm. You know, you just go for IVF and, you know, get on with it. And actually, that's really disempowering for men who are becoming more interested in their own health and their own fertility. You know, it's not 1980s man is not the man of the you know, the 2021. So, you know, men are much more interested in finding out what to do. So it's very, leaves them powerless and sort of with no control if they're told, now there's nothing you can do. But I think that doctors and IVF clinics are much more on board with it. And I think personally, it would be a very good idea, but I don't know whether this is going to happen. Hopefully after maybe our talk, that a little bit of preconceptual care gets drawn into sort of pre-IVF, even if you're not, you know, just things to improve the outcome, really. Because I think doing the same thing over and over again, i.e. doing IVF cycle after IVF cycle or ICSI after ICSI, is a bit like, it's the definition of insanity, isn't it? It's kind of, you know, you've got to find some way of maybe changing the outcome. And certainly nutrition and lifestyle is very helpful after, of course, you've looked at medical reasons why sperm is not as it should be. And I think that's very important for non-medics who are consulted for help with fertility to certainly recognize that a man, you need to eliminate the medical reasons, the top two, varicocele and infection. And people often think, oh, infection, you know, sexually transmitted, oh my God, no, you know. Of course, it's not. There are all sorts of rogue bacteria that just go AWOL, jump ship, you know, and can cause havoc to the DNA of the sperm, and then also wing their way backwards and forwards between partners. So things as simple as Gardnerella, you know, which I have found, certainly, I do a vaginal microbiome test for a lot of my clients. Gardnerella is a really common infection that can have a really poor effect on sperm DNA, and maybe just needs probiotics or antibiotics just to hammer it, followed by probiotics, followed by, you know, a few, you know, judiciously chosen antioxidants or whatever. But these are quite sort of simple things to be done at the outset. Okay, a reasonably healthy, fit-looking young man pitches up and he's got poor quality sperm. Why? It could be the you know, the canary in the coal mine. You know, a lot of researchers think that it's the canary in the coal mine of men's health. If you're looking at a young man with poor sperm, you might be thinking, what's going on here? Is there infection? Is there, you know, a forerunner of cardiovascular disease or something going on? rather than just, oh, well, there it is, it's not very good, and, you know, let's just kind of go ahead. So one of the big problems, sort of epidemiologically as well, with the possible descent in sperm counts since the 1970s. This is the Levine study of 2017 that showed a really distinct drop in sperm counts in the developed world between 1970 and 2010. And a lot of like head scratching, you know, why would this be so? And certainly obesity is right up there as one of the #1 contenders. The rise in diabetes, and it's looking like environmental chemicals are also playing quite a big role. You know, I grew up in the 1970s. I remember a lot of these things coming in, you know. I remember the first McDonald's, you know, I'm bloody antique here. You know, we just couldn't believe a Big Mac, you know, but it was a kind of treat now and again. And all the male grooming. In fact, I think it's quite interesting, somebody pointed out that modern man may be the only males of the male species who endeavors to make himself more attractive to the opposite sex, but it damages for his fertility by metrosexual man, you know, back just anointing himself with a trillion kind of cosmetics and lovely smelly things, and you know, and actually that is ruining your fertility, which is the sort of basis of sexual attraction, isn't it? So it's a bit bizarre. So I do try and encourage my clients to get back a bit more to 1970s man, where a bloke wouldn't even probably had a bath about once a week, you know, nobody in the 70s worried about anything like that. So obesity is certainly an interest of mine, and it's what I did my master's thesis on, the effect of male obesity on IVF outcome. We have a lot of research on the effect of female obesity on IVF outcome, very little on how an obese man affects the outcome. And it was interesting, I did a systematic review. Initially, I found 187 papers to do a meta-analysis on, ended up with 3 because of the heterogeneity between the studies was just only amazing. But it gave me good meat for my study, for sure. But at the end of the day, I did only end up with 3. But it certainly does play a role. So obesity is something I see a reasonable amount in my clinic, and it's not difficult to reduce fat. Actually, it's surprisingly, people think it's very difficult, but if you eat a more Mediterranean diet, follow some of the dietary guidelines that are really important for sperm, and stop doing some of the things that actually damage sperm, so what we say is an obesogenic diet, sometimes the weight most of the time the weight just drops off with just a change in lifestyle. And often the men are very receptive to and very highly motivated. There's something about wanting to improve your sperm that motivates people much more than the risk of diabetes or, you know, high cholesterol or cardiovascular disease. That's just too vague for people to get a grip on. But if you just explain, look, if you're obese, particularly abdominally, and you carry a lot of your fat around the middle, so I will explain this to my clients, that fat is metabolically active. The other fat that one carries, not very good for your joints, not very good for your heart to lug it around, but doesn't really do anything. Abdominal fat, metabolically active. You've got these big giant fat cells, these big adipocytes, and they create a bit of havoc for fertility because you get the process of aromatization, which is the conversion of testosterone, the male hormone, into estrogen, the female hormone. And that happens in these abdominal fat cells. So that's #1 reason why it's good to not be obese. #2, you get these very powerful inflammatory chemicals, cytokines, released from the big fat cells, the adipocytes. So you've now got a double whammy. You've got the hormonal changes and you've got the inflammatory mediators, so causing problems with the sperm. And then you've got the heat, because it's like having a big boiler attached to you. You radiate heat. And again, we all know that's not very good. And it's not just obesity itself that is an issue with sperm. It's actually what people eat to make them obese. So an obesogenic diet. And when I was doing my study, I found this very interesting study, which was I couldn't use in my systematic review because it was sort of just very weird, and I just couldn't include it. And it was on a huge number of men in Germany. I mean, thousands of men they'd taken into this study. But the conclusion, which didn't seem to be entirely appropriate for me to put in my own thesis, was that an overweight man married to an overweight woman had worse sperm than an overweight man married to a normal weight woman. And the conclusion of the researchers was that the normal weight woman was more weight and health conscious. So even though her husband or partner might be eating too many calories, he was probably not consuming all his calories in fast food and chips, and he was actually eating lots of olive oil and peanut butter and things like that. And he was eating better quality food. Well, you can see why I couldn't really sort of get my head around it and put it into my thesis, but I thought it was very interesting, actually. So that's one thing that we really do try and tackle. So by changing the diet to a more healthy diet, men are very good at losing weight, actually, and they're also very kind of focused as well. They're quite black and white men, I find. That might sound like a sweeping generalization, but women are much more like, oh, I just like one glass of wine and all my hormones, and my PMS, and I've got to have some chocolate. And men just don't do that. Once they made the decision to kind of do it, I always say this is a 12-week project. Think of this as a 12-week project, like you would a business project, okay? Because some of the dietary little kind of additions that I give them to do are they're very specific to male fertility. So it's very important to think of this as a project with the life cycle of a sperm being approximately 12 weeks, spermatogenesis. It sort of makes sense, and people can kind of hold that number of weeks in their mind. Whereas if it's a kind of like goes on forever, then it's really difficult to stay motivated. So we've talked a little bit about weight and the obesogenic diet. Obviously, the other things that go with it, and particularly pertinent now, oh my God, I've got this absolute thing about this. This is lockdown, the sitting disease, the new smoking, the dangers of long-term sitting down. Men, sperm, not sedentary lifestyles. The old studies looked at, taxi drivers and long distance lorry drivers, and, you could probably kind of put lifestyle into there as well, because there was probably quite a lot of smoking and fast food and stuff like that. But we know that men should not be sitting on their testicles all day. It's just not going to be any good for them. But the sitting thing is absolutely terrible. I remember at the beginning of lockdown, sitting down all day, doing my clients when, not going to work, walking to the tube, walking to the bus, all the things you do in the office. And I felt terrible at the end of the day. I was thinking, God, I feel really rough, So I started my exercise regime. I bought a standing desk attachment. I'm a real believer that you've got to, if you're working from home, you've got to manage it. You can't just plonk yourself at your kitchen table or your desk, sit there all day, eating your meals. You've got to start making time. And exercise is very important for male fertility. When we exercise, we put a force through a bone. It releases the hormone osteocalcin. Osteocalcin is a very interesting hormone. It was only discovered that it did this really at the beginning of this century. It does two things, really. One is it helps to manage blood sugar, which is why people with a tendency to diabetes or risk of diabetes should exercise. It's not really about losing weight, exercise. It's about how these hormones can help you metabolize blood sugar. You'd have to do a lot of exercise to use up a lot of calories. So that's one thing. And the other thing is it helps male fertility because it helps metabolize testosterone, and osteocalcin helps to make the Leydig cells work better, the sperm producing cells. So it's very, very important that men exercise properly, do a bit of weight bearing, maybe a bit of running, or a bit of working out, doing a class online or something, but that you take the time to think about exercise, apart from all the other benefits of exercise, stress reduction, just multiple. I'm a real big believer in exercise. I'm not the most brilliant exerciser myself. I go in and out of the couch to 5K, backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, but I do still try and exercise because I know how much better I feel. But if you know, as a man, this is what exercise will do. It will actually improve your testosterone levels and your sperm producing cells. Then it gives you more motivation in that 12-week project to think about the exercise. Next thing is sleep. So that's another thing that's just gone totally pear-shaped with all my clients, is sleep, because people are sleeping in a bit later, and so they work a bit later, and then they eat later, and then we're also bored. So what do? We're on social media, we're watching Netflix. Before you know it, it's midnight. Before you know it, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And the circadian rhythms are incredibly important for all fertility. We have testosterone levels, we have luteinizing hormone governed by the part of the brain that looks after the 24-hour body clock. So we try and live a 24-hour lifestyle to our peril. We know that moving in and out of time zones is very bad for fertility as well as general health. We know that getting 6 hours or fewer a night is extremely detrimental. So a huge Chinese study looked at sleep patterns of men and came to the conclusion that 6 hours was just about the maximum, or rather minimum, that people could manage by before it started affecting your hormones, your fertility. Your mending time is your sleep time. So your DNA is mended when you go to sleep. It's very active, industrious time, sleep. And if you're only giving yourself 5 or 6 hours, and you're going to bed at the wrong time, you're going to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, it just isn't going to work properly. So exercise, sitting, standing desk, moving, and sleep are all very much part of the lifestyle to improve fertility. And of course, you're looking at improvement in general health. The two things are not mutually exclusive, of course. And we've got all the light, dark, the blue light that comes at night, just endlessly watching screens, and then in the wintertime, never getting any daylight. All of these affect our reproductive hormones. We are people that are active in the daylight, in the blue light of the day, and inactive in the dark, and we are doing it all the wrong way around a lot of the time. So I try and advise people, come off your screens, watch TV, that's different, but don't go online and at 11 o'clock at night and then lie down in your bed and expect to be going for a good night's sleep, because it isn't going to happen. Your brain is kind of activated with the blue light of the screens. So it's all about good sleep hygiene, making a regime. So putting all of these lifestyle changes in your regime. Next is exercise, related to what you said, actually. It's about sort of fitness aids. So things like protein powders. Now that's a bit of a kind of odd one. Men who take protein powders have poorer sperm than men who don't. It's possibly to do with all the other things that men might do when they're taking protein powders. So maybe they're using steroids. We know that anabolic steroids absolutely wreck male fertility. Part of what I was saying about men kind of looking more attractive, to be attractive to the opposite sex. Actually, it really will finish off your testicles if you're using anabolic steroids. So try not to do that. Creatine, it's another component of protein powders often. It's used in fitness. There is some evidence looking at the effect of creatine on male fertility. So it's probably best just within the project time, the 12 weeks or however long we've decided, that you actually just don't do it. We just don't do it. And then the different protein powders: whey protein powder, soya protein powder, pea protein powder. Certainly soya and pea protein powder are very estrogenic in that they contain high levels of compounds called phytoestrogens, plant estrogens, very similar in shape to human estrogen. So it may be that these phytoestrogens also start to interfere and mess with the hormones a little bit. So if I've got clients who want to do lots of, that they want to do their exercise, they want to take a bit of protein powder, I suggest that they take a sunflower seed and pumpkin seed protein powder, which I know isn't very nice actually, but it kind of does the job. And actually sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds are very good for sperm. They're very good, rich source of zinc and plant sterols. So they're kind of part of the male fertility diet, but you can get them in a protein powder form for guys who want to use a bit of a protein powder. Alcohol and caffeine, they're always the things that come up in the kind of, list of no's. Now, I think it kind of depends on how much somebody's drinking, what they're drinking, if they're on a bit of a weight loss regime, if they're about to start IVF. I think it's very difficult to say to anybody, okay, you're not doing IVF, you're trying naturally to conceive, you just want to, get everything kind of improved, right? You're not having no alcohol, no caffeine, no nothing. That's a bit of a tough one to maintain. You've got to have a life. Most of my clients are in their 30s. These are the best, they're meant to be the best years of your life, and you can't go to parties. People are like, oh, you're not drinking. Oh, have you got anything to tell us? And people find that immensely stressful, and everybody starts to lose the plot after a while. So I do try and say to people, look, try and, have a few glasses of wine or a few beers at the weekend, maybe try and have 3-4 days off during the week. Don't binge drink. Binge drinking is absolutely the worst thing you can do for sperm. The government have set binge drinking at 6 units a week. I mean, this is sort of arbitrary, I just say, look, if you feel drunk and you have a hangover the next day, you've binge drunk. So don't do that. Try and imagine you're driving or something. I mean, you're not even supposed to drink anything when you're driving, so that's probably not a very good thing to say. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But with alcohol, it's quality over quantity. Just spend the money. I tell you, it's just as bad. All the chemicals that they put in drinks now, the alcohol's the least of our problems, basically. So if you're going to drink wine, you spend the money. Don't buy some cheap plonk that you knock it back. Buy really expensive, fantastically expensive wine. The better you can get, maybe a bit of organic, bit of biodynamic. Spend 15 quid on a bottle of wine, and then you won't be glugging it back in one big fell swoop. Beer, it's the same. There's a world of difference between a can of lager and a really good craft ale from a bottle, a good IPA with all the hops and the barley and stuff in it. Can of lager, just a ton of chemicals, and a can, horrible. So quality over quantity, really, with the booze. Caffeine, another thing, like, oh my God, I love my coffee, and, well, again, there's a world of difference between your coffee machine at work, your plastic cups, your cheap coffee that comes out, and a really good quality, maybe a nice organic coffee. You just make a little cafetiere, or you have your little pods of decent coffee. You just enjoy it, but then you're not knocking it back all day, because certainly caffeine can be detrimental to sperm. It's a bit difficult, like how much, I'm just looking at that, somebody's definition of binge drinking. So it's quality over quantity. Nobody's saying, no, you can't ever have a cup of coffee. That's ludicrous. That the great contraception, that would be, if that was a, reliable form of contraception, but I don't think it is. But people just drink far too much. And again, sometimes not particularly good quality. So that's kind of important. Another thing that comes up a lot is low vitamin D. So vitamin D is very current. It's very like, oh, you know, we're all really deficient in vitamin D, but it's current and topical for a reason. It is really, really important. It's especially important now because of all the research linking vitamin D and coronavirus protection. Vitamin D is not really a vitamin, it's more a hormone, and it's incredibly important for immune function. And there's a lot of research on vitamin D, the importance of vitamin D with obesity again, because it's believed that vitamin D is locked into the fat cells. It can't get into the circulation, which sounds a bit strange, but it's very important. And certainly if you are darker skinned, you need more vitamin D. Also, if you're very light skinned, you need more vitamin D because you probably are avoiding the sun. So I do tend to get people to check their vitamin D. I think it's actually, you only have to do it really once in your life during the winter, and you get an idea of what your own vitamin D level is like. Say after this, we haven't had a summer, so we've gone through the winter. There's a company called MediChecks, and they do very cheap as chips pinprick test in your finger. You just send it back to them and they will tell you what your result is and give you a reference range and tell you it's about 40 quid. Better You, a company that make vitamin D, they do a good vitamin D test online, because sometimes people think, oh, I'm fine, you know, I get loads of sun and I've got 400 IUs of vitamin D in my multivitamin, and male multis have the same. And actually, many people need much higher levels of that, and very important for our hormones, but we don't want our men to get coronavirus now. And because it does appear that there is a link between male fertility or male infertility if a man gets coronavirus badly with a temp. We know that if you get a temperature anyway, it's not good for your sperm. So you want to really take care not to get COVID, and you're doing yourself really, really good by making sure that you're optimizing your vitamin D. And I always tell people to go by the clocks every year. When the clocks change, that's my least favorite day of the year. I absolutely hate the days that the clocks go wherever they go forward, I think, in October. That's the day that you think, ping, right, I need to start taking my vitamin D, and you start it. And then when the clocks change again, unless the weather's like this, or you're not outside, then you can stop taking your vitamin D. But then you start it again in the winter. It's really, really important. Just staying on, we talked a little bit about steroids. I'm just going to mention a little bit about other medications that one just has to be a little bit mindful of, with their maybe not being great for male fertility. One of them is prescription antihistamines, not over-the-counter antihistamines, but prescription antihistamines. Obviously, if you've got hay fever, you need your antihistamines, otherwise it's really hard to get through the day. But just be mindful that you're not kind of overusing things like that. Another is hair growth medication. Again, another thing that comes up such a lot, and it's a really painful thing. Saying to somebody, look, for the 12 weeks, you have to stop taking your Propecia or your whatever hair growth medication. That's a really tricky thing to say to a guy. But sorry, my computer's collapsed, that it doesn't have, it is pretty negative for fertility. So again, it's just like project, just it'll be fine. You can go back to it after the whole fertility sort of journey is over. Now, I'll talk a bit about the diet, since I haven't actually gone on to food yet, and I'm probably running out of time. So Mediterranean diet, okay, sounds like, oh God, Mediterranean diet, but actually that is a kind of cornerstone of all healthy diets, but particularly male fertility diet, because the Mediterranean diet is all about color, and it's all about antioxidants within the diet. It's actually much better to eat a diet very rich in antioxidants, rather than carrying on eating your normal diet and taking lots of pills. It's better to do it through food, and then a couple of little antioxidants, special antioxidants that may have been shown to really be good for sperm, on top, but the diet is key. So the antioxidants are mostly the pigments, so the orange and the green and the black and the blue. So that's the first thing. You're not eating your 5 a day, you're not eating your 7 a day, you're kind of eating your 9 a day. So blueberries. I've got a special salad that I give my clients, which they all look absolutely horrified at, and it's called egg and sperm salad. One of my male clients called it egg and sperm salad, Sheena, yes, about 10 years ago, and I've kept the name. It does not have egg or sperm in it. It is just really good for, it's got lots of things in it that are very good for eggs, but very good for sperm. Very high antioxidants like watercress, red onion, contains quercetin. Quercetin is an antioxidant, particularly good for sperm. Olive oil, packed full of antioxidants. So your salad, your vegetables, just get that olive oil into it. So lots and lots of salad and vegetables and berries, blueberries, blackberries, red berries, blueberries in particular. So, you know, really just throw them into your breakfast. Have them in a smoothie if you're having your sort of protein smoothie with your sunflower and pumpkin seeds. Nuts, the Fertility study, one of the best male fertility actual studies, intervention studies, is the Fertility study. I always call it the Spanish nut study. Very good study, 115 men in the study, all with very poor semen parameters, sperm parameters, low count, poor motility, high number of abnormal forms, and high DNA frag. The only thing these 115 men had in common was they didn't smoke. And the only intervention was the nuts. 30 grams of walnuts, 15 grams of almonds, 15 grams of hazelnuts. 12 weeks later, retested, everything improved, particularly the DNA frag. So nuts are absolutely packed with antioxidants that are extremely good for sperm. Now, these are plain nuts, not roasted or salted or covered in chocolate or yogurt or anything like that. So you end up with your seeds and your nuts a bit like a budgie after 12 weeks, and you probably never want to see a nut again. But they're very, very, very important for male fertility. Next is lycopene, the compound in tomatoes. It's extremely good for sperm. I get people to just eat lots of tomato puree. Processed tomatoes are probably the healthiest processed food you can get, but you can get a supplement of lycopene as well. There's a very good supplement called lacto-lycopene around, and lycopene, very, very good for sperm. So this Mediterranean diet is incredibly important, and this goes up against the things that we know have a very detrimental effect on sperm. Processed meat, very bad. Industrial cooking oils, so fried fast food, incredibly bad for sperm. Red meat generally needs to be cut down. Now, whether this is the chemicals in meat or the chemicals in the fat in meat, if you're eating meat, try not to eat a huge amount of meat. And again, like the alcohol, quality, grass-fed, organic. An animal that's been outside and had a bit of a life is going to be much healthier than an animal that's, you know, fast and cheap. Dairy products, full-fat dairy, not good for men. Very estrogenic from lactating cows. So keep your dairy skimmed. Try not to, you know, none of this kind of loads of pints of milk and, you know, loads of milk all over your cereal. Milk is for growing baby animals bigger. It's not really for grown men in much of a way. Trans fats, banned in Scandinavia, New York, California, absolutely permitted in the food over here naturally. So they're found in cheap baked goods. So cookies and biscuits and snack foods are absolutely lethal. Things made with margarine, cheap pastries and pies. Trans fats, very, very bad for sperm. Sperm is made primarily of fat, which is why it's so sensitive to these foreign fats that basically just sort of leap on it and disable the sperm. That's kind of how they do it. Sugar, sugary drinks, artificial sweeteners and sugary drinks, things that spike your blood sugar, refined carbohydrates, very bad for obesity, obviously, very high diabetes risk, but they knacker the sperm as well. So not a good thing. Now, I'm not entirely sure where I am for time, but I haven't had my my warning yet, my 5-minute warning. So
Oh, I think we should possibly just stop there if you don't mind, Melanie, because the questions are coming in fast and furiously.
so hopefully I've kind of covered quite a lot.
Oh, you have. You've covered an enormous amount, and that was so interesting. I've learned lots this evening. That was absolutely brilliant. Lots of things I didn't know before, so that's great. Thank you so much, Melanie. That was very, very useful and informative. And we've got about 12 questions here. So because people would really like to hear your answers to some of these, could we just go to the first question? Would that be okay? In fact, I think we go backwards into the questions, because the first one is, are there any particular nuts that you would recommend?
Oh, well, the nuts, the 30 nut study, the walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, and I always throw in a couple of Brazil nuts for the selenium.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. What a great idea. Now, the next question is there any benefit to the antioxidant value of foods being uncooked over being cooked? Does cooking do them any harm?
Well, it's your cooking method can do them harm, and the length of time that you're cooking them for. So with orange vegetables like carrots and sweet potato, butternut squash, they don't mind being cooked. They don't like being boiled because you're just going to chuck them down the sink.
Yeah.
If they don't mind being roasted and cooked, you can cook them. The carotenes are very stable, the orange pigments. It's the green leafy vegetables that really you've got to be careful of. So I usually would advise steaming things like broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, things like that. Very lightly stir frying, maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes in a steamer. Conversely, raw broccoli, raw cruciferous vegetables are actually probably not very good. They're not very good for your thyroid. So you can sort of mix them up in salads and things like that, but you don't want to be having big kind of raw kale juices and things like that. And cooking some of the carotenes releases the beta carotene. So if you take a carrot, good example, a carrot. So a raw carrot contains more vitamin C and fiber, and a cooked carrot contains more beta carotene. Cooking tomatoes is much better. Cooked tomatoes are much richer in lycopene than raw tomatoes.
Oh, brilliant. Didn't know that. Well, that's really interesting. There's another question here, which is from Kerry, and she's talking about DNA decondensation. And she said, I read this weekend that antioxidants can be good for DNA fragmentation, but then they can cause DNA decondensation. Well, I don't think there's a lot of information out there about DNA decondensation. I'll tell you what it is. Because sperm can't repair themselves, they make their DNA very, very compact and condensed. But then, of course, when they get inside the egg, they have to decondense and unwind all their DNA so that the egg and sperm DNA can join together to make the embryo. I think I wouldn't worry about decondensation because it's a perfectly normal process, although I don't think it happens very often before fertilization. But antioxidants generally can be good for reducing DNA fragmentation. Now, the one thing I would say to add to all the things that Melanie has said this evening is that it's very important to have a test first to see if you have oxidative stress before you start to take antioxidants, because as I said earlier, you have to get the balance right. And if you don't have oxidative stress, then you don't really need to add antioxidants to your diet. So the thing to do is to have a DNA test, get it checked out, see if you've got DNA fragmentation from oxidative stress, and then go for your antioxidants. But you can overdose on antioxidants, so it's not wise to do that either. Now,
Really, multivitamin will have, small, low levels. So topping up with very high doses of vitamin C, vitamin E. If you stick to a good antioxidant-rich diet, you're going to get most of those in your diet. And because there is, sperm needs a certain amount of free radical activity.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's getting the balance right. Now, there's another question here, and this is, if a man's sperm test shows sperm antibodies, that's from a MAR test, is there anything you can do with diet or lifestyle to address it? Well, I think I can answer that one to say that there's not very much you can do, because MAR tests are they show the antibodies that actually are attached to sperm during spermatogenesis. They don't happen afterwards, so it's very hard to, if you have these antibodies, it's very hard to get rid of them. Having said that, ICSI can overcome MAR positive, both AGGs and AGAs. So that's probably treatment is the better way to go to get rid of your the problems that sperm antibodies can cause. Now, another one, and this is definitely for you, Melanie, would you recommend cordyceps mushrooms for sperm DNA? And this was someone who had a DNA fragmentation of 48%, which was rather high. He got antibiotics from Dr. Ramsey, which were based on the results of his wife's microbiome test. And they're just wondering what else they can do. So perhaps you can help us with that one.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I think I might be lying or winging it.
I definitely would be. I don't know what cordyceps mushrooms are. Probably, but again, less is more with mushroom therapy. Cordyceps can be very powerful, and you've always got to remember this very fine balance between antioxidants and free radicals. It's a very fine balance, and I think a little bit, I quite like the cordyceps sort of powders and teas that you can get, rather than taking a big shed load of actual pills of cordyceps. Try to maybe put them into powder in a smoothie or in your breakfast. Actually, they don't taste very nice, the powders, but the teas are actually quite good, the cordyceps teas. But yes, I mean, as a immune boost, but keep in mind, less is more a bit with this. Yeah, very good advice. Now, here's another general question, and it's talking about exercise. Are there any types of exercise which are better than others? And I think we can probably both answer this one for you. The first one is if you do weights or aerobic exercise, anaerobic exercise in the gym, then that's going to be very good for your bones and strengthening your bones. If you do aerobic exercise, which is out jogging or things that increase your heart rate and really make you puffed, those are the ones which increase your calorie burn and will decrease your weight. So what I would imagine a combination of both aerobic and anaerobic exercise are the way to go. That's certainly true of your health, and anything that's good for your health is good for your fertility. Melanie, do you have anything to add to that one?
I agree. I think cardiovascular and weight resistance exercise, the combination, and I guess the only things I would advise against would be serious cycling. I mean, just a bit of cycling at the weekend's fine, but mind your testicles. It's about testicle respect, isn't it, Sheena?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Them into a saddle, they don't like it.
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons why endurance cycling is not good. First of all, lycra heats up all the bits and pieces, and we know they're outside the body for a reason. The second thing is there are lots in men. There are lots and lots of very important nerves which run along between the buttocks, and those can be compressed and damaged by long-term cycling, and then that of course can lead to issues with spermatogenesis, so you can get decrease in sperm counts. But that is only exceptional. That's if you're doing, marathons back to back or something.
Somebody's hammering on the door. I'm at my daughter's house. I'm not going to answer it, actually.
Okay. There's one more in here, and this is talking about C-reactive protein. Now, this is probably a professional who's asked this question, but it's saying, does anyone know how C-reactive protein impacts on sperm quality? And I would say there are a couple of ways in which that can occur. C-reactive protein increases when you've got inflammation. And as Melanie has already said, inflammation leads to a release of cytokines, and that's correlated with poor sperm quality. The other thing is C-reactive protein is also related to unexplained infertility. And of course, we would say that the reason for that is possibly because the person's got an infection, and unexplained infertility would not be unexplained if additional tests were done for the men to diagnose exactly what his problem is.
Sheena, can you bear with me just while I open the door? Somebody,
of course.
The door really loud. I am so sorry, everybody. I will be 2 seconds with this.
Here's another question. Any suggestions on how to reduce your temperature for someone who's naturally absolutely boiling? Come and live in Northern Ireland. But apart from that, no, wear less clothes, keep your central heating off, you know, reduce your duvet to a 4.0 tog or something. I'm not honestly sure what the answer to that one is. Here's one about a person who has normal semen parameters except very poor morphology, and would it be worth having a DNA fragmentation test? Well, yes, I think in most cases it's worth having a DNA fragmentation test because it just gives you so much more information. Another person has said that all his tested strong results, which I assume he means are normal. Should he be looking into having a DNA frag? Well, yes, because again, this falls into the category of idiopathic infertility, but I assume the reason you're on this call is because you're trying to have a family and it's not working. Now, we have been told by our chair that we are only allowed one more question. So, Melanie, is there anything that you would like to add to what I've said already?
Shall I look at the questions and see?
Yeah, because there are lots and lots and lots coming in, and I know, oh, antihistamines. Quite a number of people have asked about antihistamines. Could you explain a little bit more about antihistamines?
It seems that, and this, we are talking about things like ranitidine and, you know, these kind of really strong prescription antihistamines, rather than Claritin or, you know, sort of nasal drops and things like that. You know, they're fine. I think it's to do with the fact that sperm has histamine receptors on it, and again, it's anything that stops that very subtle biochemical. You know, I mean, you know better than me, Sheena. It's a very complicated series of events with when sperm meets egg kind of thing, and histamine plays a role within this. And if you're on very strong antihistamines, then this may impact these histamine receptors, the way that sperm works, I suppose. You know, it's all a bit vague, all of this. So I just tend to say to people, look, don't worry about your hay fever. We try sort of more natural kind of hay fever cures, I suppose, or management really, rather than cure, rather than turning immediately to the stronger the histamine, the better, or rather the antihistamine, the better. I would, you know, just be, sorry, my screen keeps slipping back. I would just be, with all of these things, just be mindful that almost everything you take is you know, and that includes antioxidants. You know, we're shoving that in. Less is more.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I wonder, Eileen, do you have some things that you would like to say just to end the session?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, just to say, well, first of all, thank you very much to Melanie, especially for joining us, and to Sheena for their great questions and sharing of the session. It was really interesting, and certainly I learned a lot, and probably have more questions as well that I'll save for another time. But just to say thank you everyone for joining us. Please ensure that you do sign up for the next events in our series. So you can see here we've got another next month with Dr. Sarah Martins da Silva, where she will be talking Blame It on the Boogie, Fertilization Failure in Sperm. On July 6th, we're joined then by Distinguished Laureate Professor of Biological Sciences at the University of Newcastle in New South Wales, Australia, Professor John Aitken, who will be discussing his latest breakthrough paper and asking, should we be measuring DNA damage in human spermatozoa? That will be an earlier session at 10 a.m. just to account for the time difference, so just to be aware of that. And then also we're delighted to announce today our next speaker in the series, Dr. Jonathan Ramsey, consultant urologist at the Hammersmith Hospital, Imperial College, the Lister Fertility Clinic, Beaconsfield Fertility Clinic and the Agora Fertility Clinic. And Dr. Ramsey will be discussing the ideal urological workup for males experiencing infertility. So if you haven't already registered for the events, you can do so on our website at the same way as you registered for this. So thank you. And if you've any other questions or you'd like to get in touch, please don't hesitate to contact us, and you'll be able to see our details here on the screen. And any feedback, you will be asked to rate and provide feedback at the end of the event. So please do get in touch, give us some feedback. We look forward to hearing that, and we hopefully look forward to seeing you at the next event on June 22nd. So thanks again, Melanie. Thanks, Sheena. And thank you everyone for joining, and we wish you a very pleasant evening.